He was a billionaire, left paralyzed after a crash, abandoned by the woman he loved and cared for by a stranger he never asked for. But what began as bitterness turned into the most unexpected kind of love, the kind that heals not just the body, but the soul. You won't believe how this broken man found strength, stood again, and proposed under the stars to the woman who truly stayed. Where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. They say when you're a billionaire, life is bulletproof. I used to believe that. I really did. My name is Grayson Hale. I built Halecore Technologies from a cramped garage in San Diego when I was 22. By 34, I had offices in 5 countries, stock options climbing faster than I could track, and a corner penthouse with a view of the Pacific that would steal your breath. People envied me, my success, my youth, my money, but what they envied most was her. Celeste Avery wasn't just my fiancée. She was the woman the world saw beside me in magazines, at galas, on stage during tech summits. She was elegant in every sense, sharp in business, graceful in heels, and cold-blooded enough to negotiate million-dollar contracts without smudging her lipstick. We'd known each other since college. She was 2 years younger, but somehow always a step ahead. We started the company together, slept under desks during the early years, and when we finally made it, people called us the golden couple of Silicon Beach. But I didn't just love her for her mind or her looks. I loved the memory of who we were before money complicated everything. I wanted to bring that back. I wanted to make it official. So I planned something unforgettable, a sunset proposal in Malibu, just the 2 of us. No reporters, no champagne-fueled shareholders. Just Celeste and me, and the promise I'd never stop choosing her. I'd even found the ring, a rare pink diamond, the kind that glowed like the inside of a seashell. It was stupid expensive, but when the jeweler showed it to me, I didn't blink. "Nothing's too much for the woman I love," I said, and I meant it. I left the boutique that afternoon in my black Aston Martin, the ring box tucked carefully into the leather seat beside me like it was holding a piece of my soul. I was humming along to Celeste's favorite jazz record, my mind already rehearsing the words. I even imagined her laugh, the way she might cry just a little, the sound of the ocean in the background. I wasn't nervous, I was sure. I remember that feeling so vividly, that invincible calm. It was the last moment I would ever feel it. The sun was dipping low, the sky bleeding orange and purple as I coasted down Sunset Boulevard. The ring had slid slightly on the seat. I leaned over to adjust it. That's all. Just a lean, a glance, a fraction of a second. I didn't see the light turn red. I didn't hear the delivery truck barreling through the intersection until it was already too late. A horn screamed, tires shrieked, metal exploded. The sound was something primal, like the earth had cracked open. I remember my hands scrambling for the wheel, my foot slamming the brake, the ring box tumbling to the floorboard. Then, impact. Everything went white, then black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, hours, days, but I remember the cold, not physical cold, something deeper, like falling into a well where no one could reach me. When I woke up, the hospital lights felt like needles. My mouth was dry, my arms worked, barely, but my legs, nothing. Not a twitch, not a shiver. I stared at the blanket, willing something to move. Nothing did. Then came the beeping machines, the murmurs behind plastic curtains, the sterile smell of disinfectant. A doctor entered, kind, maybe in his 50s, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked like he was trying to smile but couldn't quite manage it. He spoke gently like someone breaking bad news to a child. "Mr. Hale," he said, "you're lucky to be alive." I blinked. My legs? He paused. That pause told me everything. We did what we could. The spinal damage was extensive. At this stage, the chances of full recovery are extremely low. Extremely low. That's doctor speak for nearly impossible. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the ceiling and gripped the sheets until my knuckles turned white. What I remember most in that moment wasn't pain. It was shame. Like I had failed at something only my body had been asked to do. The only anchor I had left was Celeste. I needed her. And then, like fate itself was watching, the door opened. She walked in wearing heels, her dark hair falling in waves, phone glowing in her hand like it was more alive than me. Her makeup was flawless, so was the disinterest in her eyes. "You're awake," she said flatly. I tried to smile. "You came. I had to cancel 2 meetings," she said. The board's panicking. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back. "Please," I said, my voice barely more than breath, "stay with me. Just tonight." She pressed a quick kiss to my forehead, the kind you give a child with a scraped knee, and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll handle the company for you." Then she left, just like that. That night, I lay awake staring at the IV drip as it pulsed rhythmically into my arm. The ring box had survived the crash. Someone had placed it by my bed. I opened it and stared at that pink diamond, now a cruel joke. I had been ready to give Celeste everything. My life, my name, my future. And now I was a broken man, holding a ring meant for a woman who couldn't even look me in the eye. I whispered her name. She didn't answer. In that moment, I felt it. That quiet, final death inside me. Not of body, but of hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital routines and painkillers that blurred the edges of my memory. Days bled into nights, punctuated only by nurses checking vitals or machines beeping like heartbeats I no longer trusted. My body was still technically alive, but I felt like a ghost tethered to a bed. Celeste visited. Sometimes. Not daily. Not even every other day. Just enough to remind me that she existed, that we were still technically engaged, that she hadn't officially abandoned me. But emotionally, she was already gone. Her visits were brief, sterile, more like a colleague checking in on a work injury than a fiancé caring for the man she once claimed to love. She never stayed past sunset. She never touched my legs. When I asked her to help with basic things, feeding, shaving, even brushing my hair, she waved me off with a smile that felt like a blade. "That's what staff is for, sweetheart. I'd just mess it up." But I didn't want staff. I wanted her. I wanted the girl who used to sit cross-legged on our living room floor, eating instant noodles while debugging my terrible first software build. I wanted the woman who kissed me in the parking lot after we landed our first investor. But she wasn't that woman anymore. One afternoon, I worked up the courage to ask, "Celeste, when I get discharged, will you be the one to take care of me?" Just at the start. Her laugh was soft, almost affectionate, but it wasn't kind. "Grayson, be serious. You're the chairman of the board. I'm the CEO now. We don't have the luxury of playing nurse and patient. I've got a company to run. Investors are breathing down my neck, and the media's waiting for signs of collapse. I'm doing this for us." Us. Funny how that word had started to feel like a lie. Still, I nodded. What else could I do? I was trapped in this shell of a body. She was the only thread connecting me to the world I used to command. She kissed my forehead again. Cold, distant, like pressing a stamp on an envelope, and told me she'd find someone perfect to care for me. Someone gentle, professional. You won't even notice I'm not there. But I would. Every hour, every second. The space beside me where she should be, it screamed louder than any nurse call button I could press. She left, promising she'd find help. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "I just want you." The next morning, a nurse helped me into a wheelchair. They said I was being moved to our private villa in Pacific Palisades. Celeste had arranged it all. The house staff briefed, the bedroom modified, the medical supplies delivered. A fresh nurse would join me that week. As the car pulled into the long marble driveway of what had once been our sanctuary, I couldn't help but feel like I was returning to a museum. It was all still there, the saltwater pool, the wraparound terrace, the infinity glass walls, but something vital had been stripped away. There was no life inside, just white silence and the smell of antiseptic. They wheeled me to the bedroom. I used to call it our room. Now it was just mine. The curtains were drawn, the flowers long dead. Celeste hadn't lived here in weeks. Later that day, she arrived in a fitted blazer and heels sharp enough to draw blood. She walked in like she owned the place, because she did. Legally, emotionally, strategically. She smiled at me, not warmly, but like a CEO checking on a stock that hadn't tanked yet. "I found someone," she said. "She starts tomorrow. Her name's Lila. Young but competent, comes from a good family. Personal recommendation from Miguel. Remember our driver? It's his niece." I looked at her, really looked at her. "Celeste, can it be you?" The question hung there for a moment, soft, fragile, almost childlike. Her expression didn't even flinch. "Grayson, we've talked about this. I have to keep things afloat. That's how I protect what we built." "No, that's how you protect what you run now," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She knelt, placing her manicured hands over mine. I love you, but this is bigger than you or me. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't part of us anymore. I was a brand risk, a liability, a disabled symbol that didn't fit the public image. Still, I held on to hope like a man clinging to a lifeboat with a hole in it. Later that evening, when the house was quiet, I rolled myself to the corner of the room where I'd hidden something months ago, a small velvet box. I held it in my lap, the pink diamond catching the moonlight like a cruel joke. It still sparkled, still promised forever, but forever was already slipping out the back door with Celeste's perfume and her stock options. The next morning, I waited by the door like some old man waiting for a nurse who might bring news, or food, or purpose. And then it opened. She was nothing like I'd pictured. Leila Moreno, 29, maybe 30, petite, long black hair, tied in a loose braid, no makeup, just tired eyes and a white dress that looked like it belonged to a life far simpler than mine. She carried one small bag and smiled with a quietness I didn't trust. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. I'm Lila. I'll be taking care of you starting today." Her voice was gentle, not fake gentle, just soft. Like she didn't feel the need to prove anything. I hated her instantly. Not because of who she was, but because she wasn't Celeste. Because she was a reminder that the woman I loved had outsourced me. "You're early," I said, voice clipped. "I like to prepare." "Prepare for what? To babysit a broken man?" She didn't flinch, just tilted her head. "No, sir. To help you heal, if you'll let me." I scoffed. "You can leave now. I'm contracted for 6 months. Contracts can be broken. So can people." That shut me up. She walked inside and began unpacking quietly, organizing medications, checking drawers. I watched her from my chair like a predator waiting for prey to make a wrong move. I decided then I'd find a way to push her out. Make her quit. Maybe if she left, Celeste would have to come back. Maybe she'd see I needed her. But even then, somewhere deep inside, I had the sinking feeling that Celeste was already gone. And the only person walking toward me now was someone I didn't ask for, didn't want, but might just be the only one who hadn't turned her back. The first week with Lila was war, a quiet, subtle war, but war nonetheless. She didn't raise her voice, didn't fight back with words. That would have been easier to deal with. No, Lila's weapon was patience, kindness, a calm defiance I didn't know how to dismantle, and that made me furious. Every morning she entered my room with the same tone, gentle but firm. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. How are you feeling today?" I never answered, just stared out the window, letting the silence stretch so thick it could suffocate us both. But she never flinched. She fluffed my pillows, adjusted my meds, wiped the sweat from my neck when I refused the fan. And I hated her for that, for doing the job Celeste refused, and for doing it without complaint. So I set traps, emotional ones at first, snide comments, insults masked as sarcasm. "Did they send you straight from nursing school or from the clearance rack?" I asked one morning while she helped me with my shirt. She didn't even blink. "Neither. Miguel said you liked honesty and stubbornness." I seemed to qualify for both. I stared at her. "Is this you being clever?" "No," she said, calmly smoothing the collar of my shirt. "Just being me." She always met my jabs like that, steady, unshaken. And the more she did, the more my resentment burned, because I couldn't control her. And for the first time in my life, I was the one being taken care of, stripped of power, of pride, of everything that had once defined me. So I went further. One night, after pretending to sleep, I rolled my wheelchair to the side table where I kept emergency funds. I pulled out a thick wad of cash, 10 grand, maybe more, and left it carelessly on the floor by the dresser. Then I waited. When Lila came in the next morning to sweep, I made sure to watch her through the slight crack in the door. She spotted the money almost immediately, paused, tilted her head, then without hesitation picked it up and slipped it into her pocket. My stomach twisted with satisfaction and disgust. I knew it. Everyone had a price. Later that day I confronted her. "You took something." She looked up from folding laundry. "Excuse me? I'm missing money." She raised an eyebrow. "And you think I stole it?" "Didn't you?" I wheeled forward, playing the role of the accuser. "Check your pockets. You'll find 10 grand. She reached into her sleeve, pulled out the cash, and tossed it onto the table in front of me. Her eyes locked on mine, dark, unmoving. I was going to return it, but I figured I'd let you enjoy your little game first. I didn't know what to say. She stepped closer, voice low and unshaking. Next time, Mr. Hale, try hiding better. I saw your reflection in the mirror. I opened my mouth, but she cut me off. And while we're at it, don't insult my dignity. I may wipe your drool and empty your bedpan, but I still have self-respect. I didn't come here for your money. I came because someone asked me to help a man who needed it. Then, without warning, she slapped me. It wasn't hard. But it wasn't gentle either. Just enough to shock me still. I'm not your punching bag, she said, her voice trembling not with fear but fury. I'm not your maid. I'm not Celeste. I work for a living. I don't steal, and I won't be humiliated by a man who doesn't know the difference between weakness and pride. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think you were better than this, before you started trying to scare everyone away. She walked out, leaving the room colder than I'd ever felt it. And I sat there, stunned, embarrassed, angry, mostly at myself. For a long time I just stared at the stack of cash on the table like it was evidence of my own pettiness. I couldn't stand the reflection it cast. I didn't just see money, I saw the man I'd become. Bitter, small, desperate for control in a world where I had none. I picked up the money and shoved it back in the drawer. That night, I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps and the sound of the front door closing. Curious, I wheeled myself slowly down the hall, careful not to make noise. Through the glass patio doors, I saw her, Lila, standing in the garden barefoot under the moonlight, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't angry, she looked sad. I'm trying, she whispered into the phone, but he's not letting anyone in. He's drowning, and he doesn't even want help. A pause. No, I won't quit. That's not who I am. She hung up and stood there for a while, hands folded over her chest like she was trying to keep something inside from breaking loose. Then she turned, caught sight of me through the window, and instead of being startled or embarrassed, she gave me a soft nod. Not a smile, not a gesture of forgiveness. Just acknowledgement. I didn't say anything, just turned and rolled back to my room. The next morning, when she brought me breakfast, neither of us mentioned the night before. But when she reached for my fork, I stopped her. I can try to feed myself today. She looked at me, surprised maybe, but didn't comment. She just placed the fork in my hand and said, "Take your time." It was a small thing, stupid even, but it felt like lifting a mountain. My fingers trembled. The fork clattered once, but I didn't drop it. I brought it to my mouth and tasted eggs that weren't just eggs. They were something I had earned. And across the table, Lila watched with quiet pride, her hands folded in her lap. That afternoon, I called Celeste. Her voice was curt, rushed. "Grayson, what's wrong?" "Nothing," I said. I miss you." She sighed. "Don't do this. You know I'm busy. Don't make this harder than it already is. I just thought maybe you could come for dinner." "I can't. I've got a benefit gala tonight, maybe next week." "Sure," I said, even though we both knew she wouldn't. She hung up before I could say goodbye. In the hallway, I heard a faint breath, a small sigh escaping someone trying not to be heard. Lila had been outside the door. She didn't say anything, just walked past me and into the kitchen. But that night, as she cleaned the dishes and I watched from my chair, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit until then. Celeste might have left my life, but someone else had quietly stepped in. Not to take her place, not to win my love, but just to help me stand, first with my hands, then my legs, and eventually, maybe with my heart. And for the first time in weeks, I found myself wanting to try. It was around the third week when things began to shift. Not just in my body, but in my mind. I wasn't any stronger physically. I still couldn't move my legs more than a twitch, and the pain in my lower back came and went like cruel waves, but I'd stopped lashing out, mostly. Lila's presence had grown familiar, like the ticking of a clock, constant, subtle, comforting, even when I didn't want it to be. She never brought up that night in the garden or the slap. She just showed up every day, on time, patient as a sunrise. She never hovered, never pitied me. She taught me how to manage the catheter with dignity, how to adjust my weight to avoid sores. She even taught me how to fold my t-shirts with one hand while gripping the edge of the dresser for balance. It was humiliating at first, but she made it feel like progress. One morning, she walked in as usual, hair damp from a shower, skin still dewy from the chill. She placed a fresh pitcher of lemon water on my bedside table and gave a little smile. "I scheduled a massage therapist to come by Thursday," she said. I've read some studies about pressure point therapy aiding nerve response. Might help. I blinked. You did that? On your own? She nodded. Celeste approved the expense. Celeste. The name hit my chest like a cold draft. I hadn't heard from her in over a week. Not a text, not a call, not even a forwarded company email. Lila seemed to notice the flicker of disappointment across my face, but she didn't comment. She never did when it came to Celeste. But that night, something happened that shattered our quiet routine. I was wheeling myself to the study, an old habit from when I used to work late, when my phone buzzed on the side table. It was Celeste. Hope flared in my chest. I snatched it up. "Grayson," she said, her tone clipped. "Do you have a moment? For you?" "Always." There was a pause. Then, "I just got off the phone with Lila." I froze. "Why?" "She's overstepping." My grip tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" "She's too involved. Emotional." "That's dangerous. You're vulnerable, and I need your head clear. We can't afford you getting attached to someone you're paying to care for you." "She's helping me recover, Celeste." "Exactly my point," she snapped. "I never wanted you to recover this quickly." The words stunned me silent. She kept going. "I need time, Grayson. Control. Investors trust me more with you out of the spotlight. We're stable right now, but if they think you're coming back to run the company, especially in your condition, it'll shake everything I've built." I was shaking now, but not from weakness, from fury. "You mean what we built?" Celeste let out a humorless laugh. "Grayson, I built it after your accident. You're the name. I'm the operation. Let's not confuse the two." A long silence followed. I couldn't breathe. Then she dropped the final blow. "I told Lila I'd double her pay if she stopped pushing you toward recovery. Just manage your care, keep you comfortable, nothing more." "You bribed her," I said, voice raw. "She'll do what's right. She's not complicated." The call ended before I could respond. I sat there, stunned, numb, my phone falling from my lap to the carpet. Every word Celeste had spoken echoed like glass breaking behind my eyes. She didn't want me to recover, not because she didn't believe in me, but because she didn't need me anymore. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the soft knock on the door. Lila stepped in slowly, eyes cautious. "You heard?" I asked. She nodded. I looked at her. "And?" Her voice shook slightly. She offered. I declined. "Why?" Lila stepped closer, her gaze steady. "Because I didn't come here to babysit a rich man in a wheelchair. I came because someone needed help, and I don't walk away from that." I didn't realize I was crying until she reached out and wiped my cheek. "You're not weak, Grayson. You were broken, but you're healing. And if you want to get back up, I'll help you. Not for money, not for Celeste, for you." Her words landed softer than a whisper, but stronger than anything I'd heard in months. I swallowed hard. "Why would you care?" She smiled sadly. "Because once, someone helped me when I didn't deserve it, and I promised myself I'd return that favor, one way or another." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was in pain, but because something had cracked open in my chest. Celeste's betrayal hadn't just broken my heart, it had ripped the last illusion from my eyes. I'd spent so long clinging to the idea of us that I hadn't noticed what it was doing to me. And right in front of me, someone I barely knew had done more in 3 weeks than Celeste had in 3 years. She helped me reclaim my dignity. Not with speeches, not with pity, but with presence. And that was something I didn't know how to repay. The next morning, I asked Lila to help me try the standing bars again. I hadn't tried in days, weeks, maybe, but something inside me had shifted. I wanted to try. Not to impress Celeste, not to prove anything. I just wanted to move forward. My arms trembled, my back screamed, sweat soaked through my shirt, but Lila stood behind me, not holding me, just waiting. Her hands hovered inches away, ready but never rushing. I grunted, pulled, shook, and for a fleeting second my knees locked. I stood, wobbly, uneven, but upright. Lila gasped. "Grayson." My legs gave out and I fell. She caught me halfway down, our bodies crumpling to the floor in a tangled heap. I expected pain, shame, but all I felt was relief. And when she laughed, breathless and amazed, I laughed too. Not because I'd stood, but because, for the first time since that crash, I believed I could stand again. The morning after I stood for the first time, however briefly, felt different. The light that streamed through the bedroom windows wasn't just sunlight. It felt like proof. Proof that I wasn't done yet. That somewhere deep in the ruined mechanics of my body, something still worked. Something still wanted to rise. Lila didn't make a fuss about it. She didn't clap or offer some Hallmark card encouragement. She just brought me my breakfast, set it down gently, and said, "Today we try again." That's what I liked about her. She never treated my progress like a miracle. She treated it like work, sweaty, painful, necessary work. She made healing feel possible, not mystical, not unreachable. For weeks I trained, pulled myself up on those standing bars until my arms felt like rubber. Some days, I'd make it a few seconds upright. Others, I'd collapse the moment I shifted my weight. And every time I failed, Lila was there to catch me. Quiet, calm, never judging. Just there. But the truth was, while my legs were slowly waking up, my heart was still trapped in a fog. Because even as Lila stood beside me, I still found myself thinking about Celeste. About how things used to be. About the woman I thought I would marry. I kept telling myself that once I could walk again, once I proved I wasn't useless, she'd come back. She'd see me differently. That hope, naive as it was, kept me going. One night, I sat out on the terrace alone. The ocean breeze swept through the palms and the city lights flickered like stars below. I was staring at the horizon when Lila stepped out, holding 2 mugs of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling beside me. "Too much on my mind." She didn't press, just handed me the tea and waited. After a few quiet sips, I said, "Do you think some people only love you when you're at your best?" She turned toward me, her face unreadable. "I think some people fall in love with a version of you that makes sense to them. When you change, they don't know how to love what's left." I stared down into my tea, watching the steam spiral upward. I miss her. I know. I want to believe she still cares, that she's just scared. Lila took a slow breath. Maybe she does. Maybe she is, but caring isn't the same as showing up. That line hit me hard, because Lila showed up every day, with no promise, no contract strong enough to bind her heart to this house or to me, but she was still there. Later that week, my physical therapist stopped by, a gruff older man named Nolan, who didn't believe in hand-holding or gentle encouragement. He measured progress in inches and sweat. "You're still slow," he said, watching me inch forward with the walker, "but at least you're moving." I looked at him, panting. "Thanks for the warmth." Lila smirked behind him, and I rolled my eyes. After the session, Nolan pulled me aside. "Your progress is better than expected. If you keep this up, you might be walking independently in a few months." My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. "Wait, seriously?" He nodded. "Your body's cooperating. The rest depends on how much you want it." I could barely wait to tell Celeste. That night, I called her. For the first time in weeks, she actually picked up. "Grayson," she said, surprised. "It's late." "I've got news," I said, unable to hide my excitement. "The therapist thinks I'll be walking again soon, like really walking, no chair." A long pause. Then she said, "That's good." "Good?" I repeated. "Celeste, I thought you'd be thrilled." "I am. I've got this thing tonight. Charity dinner. The firm's all here. Can we talk tomorrow?" The air in my chest felt like it had been sucked out. "Yeah, sure, tomorrow." She hung up before I could even say goodnight. I stared at the phone screen for a long time. Lila found me sitting in the dark, phone still in hand. She didn't ask, just sat beside me, her silence louder than any question. Eventually I whispered, "She doesn't care." "She might, but not the way you want her to." I turned to her. "Why do you keep saying things I don't want to hear?" "Because pretending hurts more in the end." The next day I didn't call Celeste, and the day after that I didn't even think about her. Instead, I focused on the stairs. It had been over 3 months since I'd touched a step, let alone climbed one. But that afternoon with Lila at my side, I did it. One shaky step, then another. My hands gripped the rail like it was the edge of the world, but my legs moved. My knees bent, my feet responded. When I reached the top of the staircase, I turned and looked down, sweat dripping from my chin. "I did it," I whispered. Lila was crying, not loudly, just 2 quiet tears streaking her face. "You did," she said. "I'm so proud of you." I don't know what happened in that moment. Something broke loose inside me, something I'd been holding back for far too long. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her breath caught. "I wouldn't have done it without you," I said. She looked down, flustered, her voice trembling. "You would have, eventually." "No," I said. "I was stuck, not just in my body, in my grief, in my past. You pulled me out." She didn't answer, but she didn't move away either. I didn't kiss her. Not yet, but I wanted to. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep. I kept replaying the moment, her tears, my voice, the electric hum between us. I wasn't sure if it was love, but I knew it was something stronger than gratitude. And for the first time since the accident, I wasn't chasing the past. I was stepping, slowly, cautiously, toward something new. About a month after I first stood on my own, something in me shifted. Not just physically, but emotionally. I was sleeping better, eating with more appetite. The mirrors didn't seem so cruel anymore. My legs, though still weak, had started to obey. The tremors were fewer, the balance improving. I was no longer dragging through days. I was moving through them, step by uneven step. And yet, beneath all the progress, one thought kept resurfacing like a stubborn tide. I had to see Celeste. Not because I still loved her, at least not the way I used to, but because something in me needed closure. Needed to face her, not from a wheelchair, not in a hospital gown, but standing on my own 2 feet. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about reclaiming something, my pride maybe, or just my voice. I told Lila over dinner one night. I want to visit her, I said, pushing a fork through a pile of roasted vegetables. She didn't answer right away. Just took a slow sip of her tea. She's in São Paulo, Lila finally said, attending an investor summit for the South American division. I blinked. How do you know that? She sent a package last week, company documents and a scarf. Said it was cold where she was. Her voice was flat, unreadable. So she's expecting someone? She said she'd be there through the weekend. If you're serious, I can help you make the trip. I looked at her, surprised by how easily she offered. You'd come with me? Lila smiled, but her eyes didn't. Of course. The flight was long, but I made it. My doctor cleared me for travel as long as I used a cane and didn't push too hard. We landed in São Paulo early in the morning. I remember the heat, heavy and wet like a second skin. The city buzzed with life, cars darting through narrow streets, voices rising in markets, a chaos that felt so different from the quiet, air-conditioned halls of the mansion I'd grown used to. Lila stayed close but quiet as we approached the villa Celeste had rented. A massive estate tucked behind stone walls and tropical greenery. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt, trying to keep my breath steady. You look good, her voice gentle. I gave her a tight nod. Think she'll be surprised? She paused. I think. It won't go how you expect, but maybe that's a good thing. I didn't have time to ask what she meant. We stepped through the iron gates, crossed a wide, cobblestone path, and approached the open patio doors that led into the living room. I pushed them open and stopped. There she was, Celeste, in a sundress, laughing, wrapped in someone else's arms. A man, tall, tan, probably one of those South American hedge fund types, was holding her like I used to. She kissed him, slow and intimate, like they were the only people in the world. My chest cracked open. She didn't see me at first, but when she finally turned, her smile faded into pure shock. Grayson? She breathed, her voice suddenly dry. I said nothing. The man scrambled away, muttering something in Portuguese, grabbing his shirt off the back of a chair. Wait, I can explain, Celeste started, stepping toward me. No, I said, my voice low. You don't have to. It's not what it looks like. Don't. I cut her off, sharper now. Don't insult me. I waited for you, every day. I begged for scraps of your attention. And this is what you've been doing? She stepped closer. You don't understand. Oh, I do, I said, more than ever. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pink diamond ring. I held it for a second, letting it catch the sun, the symbol of a future that never existed. The dream I'd clung to like a lifeline, and then I dropped it, right at her feet. You don't deserve this, I said softly. She reached out. Grayson, please. But I had already turned around, walked past her. My steps were slow, but they were steady, and every inch of my back that faced her felt stronger than anything I'd known in months. I didn't speak on the ride back to the hotel. Lila didn't push. She simply sat beside me, hands folded in her lap, her silence a balm instead of a wound. Back in the room, I stood by the window, staring out over the city, the sky beginning to bleed into dusk. She was never coming back. I said, No, Lila replied. Why didn't you stop me? Because some things you have to see for yourself. I turned to face her. You knew. You always knew she'd moved on. Lila nodded, eyes brimming but not breaking. I did. But I also knew you had to let her go your way. I stepped forward. And what about you? Why did you stay? Her voice trembled. Because I saw you before you saw yourself again. Because I believed in the man buried under all that pain, and I wanted to help him rise. I took her hand, gently, the warmth of it grounding me. You never asked for anything in return. I never needed to. I pulled her into a hug, quiet, close, full of everything words couldn't say. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. I felt held. We flew home the next day. The mansion looked different now, less like a prison, more like a beginning. I stepped through the front door on my own, cane in hand, no wheelchair, no aid, just Lila beside me. On the front steps I turned to her. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. For what? She asked. For being the one person who didn't leave. She shook her head. I didn't stay because I had to, Grayson. Then why? Because somewhere along the way, you became the reason I believed in good again. I didn't kiss her then. Not yet. But I knew without doubt I would, soon. The days that followed our return from Brazil felt strangely still, like the world had finally stopped spinning just long enough for me to breathe. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up chasing Celeste's ghost. Her name no longer haunted the silence. The air in the house was lighter, clearer, and the sun that filtered through the windows no longer seemed to mock me. Instead of staring at the ceiling each morning, I sat up. I reached for my cane without a nurse's reminder. I stretched without grumbling. I even started reading again, actual books, not just emails or sterile medical updates. My mind was sharpening. My steps, though still uncertain, no longer felt like borrowed movements. They were mine. Earned. But more than that, I had Lila. She was quieter now, still kind, still attentive, but I noticed something shift in her. She moved through the house like someone trying not to leave footprints. When I cracked a joke, she smiled. But her eyes lingered on something far away. When I caught her humming in the kitchen, she stopped the moment she saw me watching. Something was weighing on her. I could feel it. One evening, after a long therapy session, I found her sitting alone on the garden bench, the same one where we had shared tea during my first night of real progress. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale from the pressure. I approached slowly. You okay? I asked, settling down beside her. She looked startled, then offered a small smile. Yeah, just thinking. About? She hesitated. Grayson, I need to tell you something. My chest tightened. What is it? Her voice was soft but unwavering. Back when I started, when Celeste first hired me, she told me not to push you. Told me she wanted you stable, not improving. Said she needed time to secure control of the company. She didn't want you walking again. She offered me money to make sure you didn't. I stared at her. The quiet night buzzed with distant crickets and the faint hum of a passing car, but her words rang louder than any of it. You knew? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I knew what she was asking, but I never intended to listen. I only stayed silent because I saw how much you needed hope. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, it would crush you. I swallowed hard, anger rising in my throat, not at her, but at the situation. At the fact that the woman I once trusted with everything had manipulated even my recovery. I should have told you sooner, Lila whispered, but I couldn't bear the thought of you giving up again. And honestly, I was scared. Scared you'd hate me for keeping it from you. I reached over, took her trembling hand in mine. I already suspected, I said. I think part of me always knew what Celeste was really about. I just didn't want to believe it. Lila's eyes widened. Then why didn't you say anything? Because I wasn't ready to let go. And because you were the only thing holding me together. I didn't want to push you away. Her lip quivered, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Lila, I said gently, you didn't hurt me. You saved me. Over and over again, you showed up when no one else did. You saw something in me worth saving, even when I didn't. She finally broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks as I pulled her into a hug, her body trembling against mine. We stayed there, wrapped in the warm stillness of the night, the garden lights twinkling like stars fallen from the sky. You changed everything, I whispered, and not just my body. You gave me back my will. She looked up at me, her cheeks wet, her eyes searching. Then why do I feel like I'm losing you? You're not. She shook her head slowly. You're healing. You're walking. Soon you'll be running your company again, flying to boardrooms and summits. You don't need a caregiver anymore. I don't need a caregiver, I said, brushing her hair gently behind her ear. I need you. Her breath caught. You don't understand, I said, my voice thick with truth. This house, this progress, my legs, I wouldn't have any of it without you. But what matters more is that for the first time in my life, I don't feel alone. Lila stared at me like she wanted to believe me, but wasn't sure she could, so I made sure she knew. The next morning, I asked her to meet me in the garden at sunrise. I had the staff place 2 chairs beside the koi pond where the light touched the water like molten gold. When she arrived, still in her robe, blinking sleep from her eyes, I stood without my cane, slowly, carefully, but I stood. She gasped. You're not supposed to. I know, I said, but I needed to do this my way. I took a step toward her, then another. When I reached her, I held out my hand. Sit with me? She nodded, and we sat in silence for a long time. Finally, I turned to her. I know you came here as my caregiver, and I know this was never part of the plan. But life? It's messy like that. She smiled faintly. Messy's an understatement. I'm gonna start taking back the company soon. I want you by my side when I do. Not as a nurse, not as an employee. Her eyes widened. I continued, heart pounding. But as someone I trust, someone I love. There it was. The words I'd been too scared to say until now. I love you, Lila. Not because you helped me walk, but because you never left when I couldn't. You stayed, when it was hardest, when I was at my worst. She covered her mouth, tears falling again, but this time they were different, softer, fuller. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a while. I kissed her then, not like in the movies, not fast or perfect, but tender, real. The kind of kiss that says I've been through hell and found my way back. The kind that means you're home. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I realized something simple but powerful. I didn't just survive. I had lived. Because of her. A month after that morning in the garden, life inside the house changed completely. Not with fanfare or grand announcements, but in the quiet way real transformation happens. The air smelled like something new. Something blooming. Lila had started planting daisies and lavender along the edge of the walkway, claiming she missed the scent of wildflowers from her grandmother's garden. Now, every time I passed by the windows, the breeze carried a softness I hadn't felt since before the accident. I no longer used the cane. Not all the time, at least. My steps weren't perfect, still a bit uneven. My right knee buckled more than I'd like. But they were mine. Fully. Each morning I walked a few slow laps around the house while Lila made breakfast. She didn't hover anymore, didn't treat me like I'd fall apart. She simply waited, always within reach, letting me learn that I could stand on my own even while knowing she was near. And that, I think, is how love grows. Not with declarations shouted from rooftops, but with presence. With silence that doesn't ask for filling, with hands that wait instead of grasping. On the day I returned to the company, I wore a navy suit that hadn't fit me since before the crash. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because he was unfamiliar, but because he was whole again. Not just physically, but emotionally. I took Lila with me. She wore a simple cream blouse, her hair pulled back, no makeup except the pink warmth that always flushed her cheeks when she was nervous. I held her hand in the lobby, ignoring the curious glances from board members and assistants as we passed. We stepped into the executive conference room together. The murmurs started the moment we entered. Some employees hadn't seen me in nearly 6 months. They rose out of respect, unsure whether to applaud or just stare. I walked to the head of the table and turned to face them. This is Lila Moreno, I said, my voice steady, clear. Not just the woman who helped me recover, but the woman who reminded me who I am. She stood by me when I couldn't stand at all. I expect every one of you to treat her with the same respect you've always shown me. There was a silence, followed by a ripple of polite nods, then murmured greetings. Lila squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled. Later that evening, we walked the long hallway toward the bedroom. Together, like always. But something about the light felt different. More golden. More alive. I paused halfway and looked at her. You tired? I asked. She shook her head. Not really. I guided her through the sliding doors into the garden, where fairy lights glowed like stars strung across the hedges. We'd never replaced the fancy chandeliers Celeste once installed. Instead, Lila had wrapped warm bulbs around the pergola, creating something less grand but infinitely more beautiful. She turned to ask what we were doing, but I was already kneeling. Not dramatically, no fanfare. Just one knee on the soft grass, hands trembling slightly as I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, unadorned ring. Not the pink diamond. That had been buried in another life. This one was simple, white gold, with a tiny engraving inside that read, "Still standing." "Lila Marino," I said, my voice cracking despite myself. "You didn't save me because I was rich. You didn't stay because you wanted anything from me. You stayed because you saw something in me no one else did. And in return, I found something in you I never knew I needed. Peace. I don't know what the future looks like. My legs still ache. I may fall again, but if you'll stand beside me, I promise I'll keep standing too. For you. Always. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded before she could even speak. "Yes," she whispered, dropping to her knees so she could wrap her arms around me. "Yes, Grayson, 1,000 times yes." We held each other there under the soft lights, neither of us needing anything else. No audience, no cameras, no applause. Just breath and warmth and two hearts that had found each other in the wreckage. The following weeks melted into joy. Quiet, solid joy. The house that once felt like a mausoleum now pulsed with life. The guest room became her office. The kitchen echoed with music and bad dancing. The nights, once filled with pain and insomnia, now ended in shared whispers, soft laughter, and the feeling of a hand always nearby. I still did my therapy, still trained, still met with doctors who monitored my nerves and joints, but healing no longer felt like a finish line. It was just part of living. And I was living. A month after our engagement, I woke up early, unable to sleep. The sky outside was just starting to lighten. I found Lila in the living room, curled up on the couch with a mug of tea. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked. She smiled. "Nervous about tomorrow." Tomorrow was our wedding. It wasn't going to be a lavish affair. Just us, a few friends, and the garden where I had learned how to walk again, where I had learned how to love. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Me too," I whispered, but in a good way. She nodded, then rested her head against me. "You ever think about how crazy all of this is?" she asked. "How we started?" "Every day." "Do you regret any of it?" I turned to her. "Only that it didn't happen sooner." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Still standing?" I grinned. "Always." And in that moment, with her heartbeat steady against mine, I realized the truth I'd been chasing for months. I hadn't just regained my strength. I had rebuilt my life. And this time, it wasn't built on image or ambition or the illusion of perfection. It was built on truth, on quiet loyalty, on love that didn't ask for anything in return. A love that stayed. And because of that, I would never fall again. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means something in Grayson's journey touched your heart, and that means the world to us. This story reminds us that sometimes life breaks us in ways we never expect. But healing doesn't always come from wealth, status, or even the people we thought we could count on. It comes from presence, from kindness, from someone who sees us not for what we've lost, but for what we can still become. It's never too late to start over, never too late to find someone who stays, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Every single day. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. And if you found value in this story, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss our next video. Every week, we share stories that inspire, move, and remind us all of the quiet power of love, resilience, and second chances. Until next time, take care and remember, the heart heals stronger when it's held with patience.